She looked at me and said we could move on, and that's when I realized she already had, just not with me. I didn't expect the room to feel different. Same walls, same soft afternoon light slipping through the curtains, same quiet hum of a place that had once felt like a pause from the rest of the world. But the moment I saw her standing there, I understood. Familiarity doesn't mean unchanged. She smiled when she saw me, not a forced smile, not distant either. It was warm, practiced, the kind of smile you give someone you care about but no longer wait for. That difference landed before any words did. She was dressed simply, nothing that tried to impress. A fitted sweater, sleeves pushed up slightly, hair resting loosely on her shoulders. She looked comfortable in herself, grounded, and that, more than anything, unsettled me, because I remembered when she wasn't. "Hey," she said, voice calm, steady. "Hey," I answered. Feeling younger than I was the moment the word left my mouth. As I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and something clean, detergent, maybe, felt lived in, settled, like someone had already decided this space was enough. She moved past me to close the door, and for a second, her hand brushed my forearm. Just a light touch, polite, brief, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you. It used to linger. We sat across from each other at first. Not intentionally, it just happened that way. She asked how I'd been, and I gave her the usual answers. Work, life, busy. She listened attentively, nodding at the right moments, eyes soft but no longer searching mine for something unspoken. That's when I noticed it, the ease. She wasn't tense around me anymore. No careful pauses. No nervous adjustments. No leaning in as if waiting for me to say something I never quite did. She sat back comfortably, legs crossed, hands resting in her lap. Peace. I told myself that was a good thing, that this was what maturity looked like. Two people who'd moved past the ambiguity without resentment. But there was a quiet ache beneath that logic. Because I realized something then, the distance wasn't cold. It was complete, like a door that had been closed gently, without a sound. No slam, no argument, just done. At one point, she stood to pour more coffee. As she passed, I caught the faint scent of her. Familiar, comforting, and suddenly bittersweet. When she handed me the mug, our fingers touched again. This time she smiled apologetically, as if acknowledging something neither of us would say. I wanted to ask when it happened, when the waiting ended, when she stopped leaving space for me. But instead, I watched her sit back down, perfectly at ease in a way she'd never been before. And in that moment, before any names were spoken, before any truths were said out loud, I understood the shape of what I'd walked into. I hadn't arrived too early. I'd arrived after. She was telling a story, something small, almost forgettable. A missed appointment, a tire that needed air. One of those everyday inconveniences that don't matter until someone shows up to help. She laughed softly at herself, shaking her head, and then she said his name. Just once. No pause. No warning. No careful framing. The sound of it settled between us like a weight neither of us reached to lift. I didn't react right away. I nodded, pretending it meant as little to me as she made it sound. But inside, something tightened, not sharply, not dramatically. Slowly, like realizing you've been holding your breath without noticing. She noticed my silence, of course she did. She always noticed things like that. He's been around a lot lately, she added gently. Not defensive, just explanatory. He's reliable. Reliable. The word landed harder than his name. She tucked one leg under herself on the couch, turning slightly toward me as she spoke. Open posture. Honest. Her thumb traced slow, absent circles along her wrist. A habit I remembered from moments when she was choosing her words carefully. When she wanted to be fair. I shifted closer without thinking. Not enough to invade her space. Just enough to feel like I still belonged somewhere near her. She didn't move away. But she didn't lean in either. That neutral stillness said more than rejection ever could. He listens, she continued. Doesn't overthink things. If I say I need help, he just shows up. I swallowed. Not because I disagreed, but because I recognized the truth buried underneath her calm delivery. She wasn't praising him. She was explaining herself. I thought about all the times she'd hinted, all the pauses I'd filled with caution, the conversations I'd postponed because I didn't want to misread her, didn't want to cross a line I was afraid existed only in my head. I had believed patience was respect. Now I wondered if it had felt like absence. She looked at me then, really looked at me as if checking whether she'd gone too far. Her eyes softened. I didn't mean to surprise you. I smiled, small and tired. It's okay. It wasn't. But it was honest enough to pass. She reached for her mug, wrapping both hands around it, shoulders relaxing as if she'd said what needed to be said. That ease, that relief told me this wasn't new for her. Whatever this was with him, it had already settled into her life quietly, without ceremony. Jealousy crept in, not loud or angry, felt dull, heavy, the kind that comes from knowing you don't have the right to feel it, even as it settles in your chest. I realized then that I'd never asked for clarity, never defined anything. I had lived in the comfort of almost, assuming there would be time, assuming she would wait. She had, until she didn't. She wasn't choosing him over me in that moment. She had already chosen herself, and he happened to be standing where I never quite stepped forward. As she continued talking, her voice calm and unguarded, I understood something I hadn't prepared for. The story I thought we were still writing, she had already turned the page. She didn't say it right away. The words came after a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough for hope to step in, even when it shouldn't. We had drifted into quieter conversation, safer topics, work, a show she'd been watching, small updates that felt like placeholders for something heavier sitting between us. The room had grown still, the kind of stillness that makes every movement feel louder than it is. She set her mug down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table. That detail caught my attention, how deliberate she suddenly became. When she looked up at me, her expression was soft, but resolved, like someone who had practiced this moment in her head. I think, she started, then stopped, a slow breath in through her nose. I think we can move on. The words were gentle, thoughtful, almost kind. They weren't meant to hurt. That was the problem. For a second, I didn't respond. I watched the way her fingers wrapped around each other, how her shoulders stayed relaxed even as her eyes searched mine for understanding. She wasn't asking permission. She was offering closure. She leaned forward then, just slightly, and reached for my hand. Her palm was warm when it closed around mine, her thumb pressing once. A quiet reassurance, the kind you give when you believe you're doing the right thing. We don't have to make this heavy, she said softly. We had something meaningful. It doesn't have to define us forever. Define us. I nodded because that's what you do when someone speaks from a place of clarity and you're still trying to find your footing. I told myself she was being mature, compassionate, that this was her way of protecting both of us. But inside, something fractured. Moving on, to her, sounded like a next step, a decision made after reflection. To me, it sounded like erasure, like taking all the moments that lived in the quiet spaces between us and folding them away neatly, as if they hadn't shaped me. Her hand lingered for a moment longer, then slipped back into her lap. The absence of her touch felt louder than the touch itself had been. Final. I just don't want either of us stuck, she added. Waiting for something that isn't clear. Waiting. The word echoed, because that's what I'd been doing. Waiting for the right moment, the right sign, the right certainty. I had thought patience was enough, that if I stayed steady, if I didn't rush or pressure her, things would find their way naturally. She had found her way, just not with me. I looked at her then, really looked. The calm in her eyes wasn't indifference. It was relief. She had already done the hard emotional work of letting go, of redefining us in her mind. She was inviting me to catch up, and I wanted to. I wanted to match her composure, to say the right thing, to accept the grace she was offering. But grief doesn't move at the same pace for everyone. I realized something in that moment. This wasn't a conversation happening in real time. It was the final chapter of something she'd already finished writing. And I was being handed the ending, without ever getting to write my part. The silence after her words stretched longer than either of us expected. She watched me carefully, not impatiently, just present, like she was giving me space to arrive at the same emotional place she already stood in. I tried to stay there with her, tried to accept the calm ending she was offering, but something inside me refused to settle. It wasn't anger. It wasn't blame. It was the quiet ache of being misunderstood. So I spoke. "You already did," I said, my voice lower than I intended, steady but not sharp. "Move on, I mean." Her brow furrowed slightly, not defensive, confused. I took a breath before continuing, knowing that once I did, there would be no taking it back. With him. The words hung between us, unadorned and honest. She didn't interrupt. That mattered. She stayed still, hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes fixed on mine as if bracing herself for something she hadn't wanted to assume. "I'm not saying you're wrong," I added quickly, "or that you owed me anything." I swallowed. It feels strange to be asked to let go of something you already replaced." That's when she looked down. Her lips pressed together, jaw tightening just enough to betray the composure she'd been holding. She drew in a slow breath, fingers curling slightly into the fabric of her sweater. "I didn't replace you," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "That's not what it feels like to you. But from where I'm standing, it still feels like loss." I explained then, not in accusations but in moments, how I noticed the way her energy shifted, how she no longer leaned into the pauses between us, how her laughter came easier now, her silences lighter, how she spoke about the future with certainty that used to feel reserved. "I thought we were still circling something," I said. "And maybe you were. But you were circling with someone else." The room felt heavier, as if the air itself had slowed. She remained quiet, absorbing every word. When she finally looked back up, her eyes were glossy, not with anger but recognition. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "I know," I answered. "And I did. That was the hardest part. There was no villain here, just timing and choices and two people standing on different emotional pages." She leaned back slightly, exhaling as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks. The calm she'd carried earlier fractured, revealing something raw beneath it. "I didn't think you were waiting," she admitted. "You never said you were." I nodded. "I didn't think I had the right to." That truth settled heavily between us. We both understood it then, the space where everything went unsaid, where caution had disguised itself as respect, where patience had slowly turned into distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable this time. It was honest. "I needed to hear that," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "So did I," I replied, saying it didn't change the outcome. It didn't rewind anything or rewrite her choices. But it gave shape to the ache, turned confusion into clarity. And sometimes that's the only kind of closure you get. Not the one that saves the relationship, but the one that saves your sense of self. She didn't speak right away. After everything I'd said, she seemed to fold inward, as if finally allowing herself to feel the weight of it instead of managing it. The confidence she carried so effortlessly earlier softened, giving way to something more human, more tired. "I didn't plan for it to happen," she said at last, eyes still lowered. Her voice wasn't defensive. It was quiet, almost careful. "I really didn't," she explained slowly, choosing her words the way someone does when they don't want to rewrite history, only to be understood within it. She talked about the months before, how lonely she'd felt even when she wasn't alone, how she had grown used to being the strong one, the composed one, the woman who didn't ask for much because she'd learned not to expect it. "I kept telling myself not to want more," she admitted. "Not to need clarity. Not to pressure you." That admission hit harder than I expected, because I recognized myself in it. The same restraint mirrored back at me. She leaned forward then, elbows resting on her knees, hands clasped together. Her shoulders sagged slightly, as if letting go of an image she'd been holding upright for too long. "He didn't promise anything," she continued. That's the strange part. He just showed up. When I said I was overwhelmed, he came over. When I was quiet, he stayed anyway. She let out a small, humorless laugh. I didn't realize how starved I was for that until it was there. I watched her as she spoke. The way her eyes glistened. The way her voice wavered just enough to reveal the vulnerability beneath her calm. This wasn't justification. It was confession. I didn't choose him because he was better, she said, finally meeting my gaze. I chose what felt steady. The word steady echoed the way reliable had earlier. And this time it didn't sting as much. Clarified. I reached into my pocket and offered her a tissue. She hesitated, then took it. Our fingers brushed, and this time, she didn't pull away immediately. The contact lingered, not charged, not romantic, just human. Shared. I was tired of waiting for something to define itself, she said softly. I didn't want to wake up one day and realize I'd imagined it all. There it was. The fear beneath everything. Not of losing me, but of losing herself to uncertainty. I nodded slowly. I understand. And I did. Not completely, not without pain, but enough to stop resisting the truth of it. She leaned back, pressing the tissue gently beneath her eyes, then exhaled. When she smiled again, it was smaller, fragile, real. I hate that it hurt you, she said. That was never my intention. I know, I replied, and for the first time, the words didn't feel like something I was saying to be kind. They felt true. In that moment, the dynamic between us shifted, not back to what it was, but into something clearer. Two people finally acknowledging the cost of their restraint. She hadn't moved on because she didn't care. She moved on because caring without ground beneath her feet had become too heavy to carry. An understanding that didn't erase the loss, but it gave it meaning. The conversation didn't end with a clear line. It softened instead, easing into something quieter, almost tender. The heaviness that had filled the room earlier began to thin, replaced by a shared understanding that nothing more needed to be proven. We both knew where we stood. She glanced at the clock on the wall,